Alright, everyone. We finally, after a long wait, I might add, got a new set of patch notes for TFT for patch 11.16. This is the first real patch we've gotten on set, oh god, 5.5. So let's go through it. Get back to that later. Got some new little legends for Sentinels. Oh my god, that's adorable. That's not bad. Yeah. So you can buy some new packs to get some of the new eggs to get some of the new little legends. Have fun with that. All right. As usual, they if you haven't done this before, they've changed how they give out the patch notes. Used to be they kind of just shotgunned everything in a particular order. Now they're doing large changes and small changes. So let's go through them. First off, Abom. Abom in general, I think it's been pretty difficult for Riot to balance. It's been really good in the early game. Oftentimes, once you get up to Abom 4, it's been really strong and can kind of tank its way through most of the stages. So, one thing they did was they added stage scaling. So now the monstrosity scales as you go through more and more stages. The problem there's been a problem with that in those early parts of those stages is that it's made you pretty strong, particularly in stage 2 and 3. Whereas in stage 4, most people have just started to roll down and they've gotten a good bit stronger. Um, so it falls off pretty hard, but the problem is you've done so well through the mid game that you've pretty much carried yourself all the way into the late game. Like Abom, you can just ride for about ever. So, they've done some rescaling here. So in the early game, it goes down a little bit. Late game's a little up, but the overall scaling has gone down. Um, Also, the health per star level of your champion, because that's bonus health you get for each star level of the Abomination champion you get. That's been um, that's been decreased at the three A bomb level. I have the mental math of that to figure it out. Um, I don't think this will impact the game too much. If anything, the stage scaling makes it even weaker in the late game. But at the same time, it does fall off pretty hard, like mid stage 4, to be honest. Rework. Legionnaire has gotten a pretty significant rework. So Legionnaire has always kind of been a little awkward to play because the health gain has been attached to their spells, and it's not like optimal. It's not great. So it's now been changed that the Legionnaire you get the bonus attack speed, and the health is now a proportion of the damage you deal in attacks and abilities. So it's just an Omnivamp now. So the attack speed itself has been unchanged, but the Omnivamp has been added in, and this Omnivamp is actually pretty good. This Omnivamp's probably a big deal for Draven, who kind of can struggle to get that healing back and often requires a Bloodthirster. This should open up a lot more builds for Draven, because before I found it very difficult to play Draven without Bloodthirster. It just didn't work. Other changes, tier 2 champions. Tristana. Tristana is getting an attack speed nerf. Thank God. A 3-star Tristana was way too strong in the late game. We've TFT's always had an issue with champions that de-aggro, similar to what Tristana does. And it's not just that Tristana de-aggros, it's that she de-aggros all the way across the board. So, like, she jumped away from what was already attacking her, and the things that she jumped to are unlikely to attack her because they're already attacking something else. It's very difficult to play around. You never kill Tristana, and Tristana can kind of just carry an entire comp, especially with high Hellion counts with high attack speed. It just gets out of control pretty quickly. So I'm pretty happy to see this nerf. Irelia, the damage reduction. Irelia is crazy. They also reduced her AD. Yeah, Irelia is kind of one of the best champions in the set right now. Um, does fall off at the end game, but can easily just carry you straight into the late game, and you can just keep her in to keep the trait bot, and it's perfectly fine. Tier 3 champions. So Nocturne, how do I want to describe what they kind of did to Nocturne? Uh, there's a lot of changes here, but in general, what has been changed is that his passive ability now does bonus physical damage rather than just being an ability that does something. So, and that bonus damage now scales with AP. So, it's not the third attack does additional like percent AD. It's that it does AD that scales off AP, and it's just bonus damage. Um, it's an interesting rework that I think nerfs Nocturne like kind of hardish in general. Uh, the only plus side is that his heal is now just like pure 100%, but doesn't scale with AP. That's actually a pretty good change. But like the rest feels really awkward. Like these numbers feel very low for Nocturne. Now they should still crit, but I don't see this. This feels like a nerf to me. Um, we'll see how it ends up. I mean, to be honest, Nocturne isn't really a top tier build anyway. It just generally gets you into top three, top two, but it rarely wins lobbies in my opinion. So we'll see where this goes. It does give Ride an additional lever to kind of tweak Nocturne, which I think was probably the goal of this change. Tier 4 changes. Lucian. So it's been said for a while now that Lucian. Well, let's start with these. Galio. So Galio is actually getting buffs, which is mildly surprising to me. I've kind of thought Galio was one of the best forecast frontliners in the game. One of the best tanks in the game, period. Mostly because he has a taunt. He gets pretty good shield, self heal. It's actually kind of crazy how much work he can do in the front line. They did nerf his 3-star damage because I've seen demonstrations. Yeah, this kills, and it probably doesn't need to kill with how like tanky he really is. So this is a questionable change to me. I don't think it was really that necessary. I think the bigger issue was that he just didn't fit into a lot of comps because knights you usually don't end up playing in the late game unless you're playing like 4 knights. And it's traits of draconic, knight, sentinel. They don't play nice. Karma buff. This was much needed. This is basically undoing the last nerf they did to Karma. Um, Without Karma, there were no AP comps anyone was willing to play in the game, which just kind of made this degeneracy of front lines of just ironclad and knights everywhere. Like nobody was playing. You were just stacking ironclad and knights, and no one played mystics at all because there was no reason to. Because if you ran into the other AP build people ran Heimerdinger, you just died anyway. It really didn't matter that you teched in mystics. Heimerdinger just did that much damage. So hopefully this addition of Karma opens up a lot more builds, I think, and a lot more build variety. Because right now we're just slamming AD on everything, unless we know we can get into the late game with Heimerdinger. Lucian changes. So they said they were going to do this for a while. Every other shot of the calling now counts as an attack, so that's relevant for Hurricane, Static, Gwinsu, Titans, etc. So everything that attacks the calling now counts as an attack for on every other shot. Good change. Gives him a lot more damage, especially with Hurricane. Hurricane is probably going to be a pretty crazy item on him. But in return, they took 100 health from him. He already has one of the lowest health pools of a 4-cost, and they lowered it even more. Really makes him a glass cannon, ironically, because he's a cannoneer. I'm fine with this, but I worry this kind of just went too far in the glass cannon route. I don't mind it. It's fair. There's nothing wrong with it. But the glass cannon route is always kind of like tricky to play with because if you run Lucian and he doesn't get touched, he wipes the field. But if you run Lucian and he gets touched, your entire comp is destroyed. Item changes. Quicksilver. Quicksilver's getting a buff because no one's making it. I think that the explanation to my understanding, as to why Quicksilver's getting a buff is that no one's building it because fights last too long. I just don't know if there's that much CC that's relevant for it, to be honest. Once you get past Volibear, there aren't a lot of carries that you really need this for. Volibear and Ivern, and that's really about it. Your carries are often not in range of CC units besides those two. At least in my experience. Blue Blessing Radiant, it's getting ability buff. No one's making it because it's a blue buff that adds some ability power when you hit Radiant. It's not a great item. I don't think this will really change that. Stoneplate is adding even more armor and magic resistance. So I've messed with this item a bit. It's actually a pretty good item. But I can understand why people don't use it because it's not the most valuable item. It's very circumstantial. The best champion to put it on is Galio. It's actually kind of crazy on Galio. Demon Slayer base damage amp goes from 35 to 40. There's been a lot of complaints about Giant Slayer and Demon Slayer. I think Demon Slayer is fine because this amount of damage buff is actually insane. But the barrier for like triggering the bonus damage on Demon Slayer and Giant Slayer is probably a bit too high. Someone did the math, and I think it's only like 1/3 of the game's units will actually trigger that health pool, that health number to trigger Giant Slayer and Demon Slayer. I think kind of the bigger issue though is that most of the damage, most of like the front line isn't like HP heavy champions. It's actually like armor heavy champions. Champions just have infinity armor. In which case, Last Whisper is just an infinitely better item that carry than Giant Slayer. So this kind of just goes into the line of champions. It's not really, there's no like high health pool frontliners outside because we're not playing brawlers mostly. I would say if we were playing brawlers as frontliners, it'd probably be a bit different. But brawler as a frontliner isn't a thing. It's just knights and ironclad. So I think that's probably the bigger issue here, despite everyone clamoring that the health total is too high. I think it's more that Last Whisper in most situations is just much better for dealing with front lines right now. Ginsu's Reckoning, even more attack speed. I think you're at the cap now if you're in Radiant. I honestly don't know, but I'd assume you're at the cap. You're attacking that fast. Still not a great item. I think a damage buff would have been better there, but that might have been out of control on a handful of champions. Covalent Spark, yeah, the health regen was a bit too high, so they're cutting it in half down to 1%. That's fair. I think they did that on a couple items too. The crit gauntlet. This one's interesting to me. They actually buffed it. I'm curious. I think probably what's happening here is that the crit effect itself is so strong that there's really not much difference between the glamorous crit gauntlet and a normal crit gauntlet, and that's just the nature of how crits work. So this shouldn't change much at all, if anything. Locket, yeah, this isn't a very good item, even though it probably should be. These numbers are kind of outrageous. I think probably the bigger issue is that these numbers would be outrageous if it was in the early game, but you don't get this to like 3-6. If you're playing scrims and you find it, it's okay, I guess. Rabadon's Ascended Death Cap boost. Yeah, it's Death Cap. I am curious, like, at what point this gets so high that it's basically good on any unit in the game. I don't know what that is, but this feels like it's getting dangerously close. Radiant Redemption. Oh my god, 35 was too high. I'm so glad they changed this. Yeah, Radiant Redemption is one of the most ridiculous items in the game. Static Chain Lightning is getting boosted. This is actually not a bad item. This is a lot of damage that you do. That stacks up pretty quickly. So this isn't a bad item. I'm happy to see it get buffed. I think most people still kind of play static for the MR shred, but you should be thinking about playing this. This is a lot of damage they just added to this. Not to mention the fact it already did a lot of damage. And Sunfire Cape going down half again. Yeah, this item, while this item wasn't as great as the Covalent Spark or the Redemption, it still did a lot of work in terms of both damage and this self-heal ability. Smaller changes, the Cannoneer scaling's going down a little bit. I don't think it was really necessary, but it's only 2, so I'm not going to complain too much. Hellion attack speed. So this one has bounced around a lot on the past couple of patches, or on the past couple of notes. So we added 2 and had it at 5%. We have 4, which is essentially a little below where 5 was. And then we have 6, which was a little below 7. And then they have this ridiculous 8 that no one actually hits. So Hellion, the problem with Hellion has really been Tristana, and to a lesser degree Kled. Those 2 in particular can deal a lot of damage really quickly when you give them these kind of attack speed boosts. So while 2 Hellion is kind of a meaningless trait because 5% attack speed boost, like it's not even worth flexing in a champion that's useful. 10%, it's a little more useful. But at 4 became a pretty common playing point. I think originally in the patch notes, this was actually going up to like 35, and I was kind of like, whoa, let's not go that far. Because Tristana would just destroy things. Same thing with 6. People kind of were... Hellion should fall off pretty hard, in my personal opinion, but it's not. In fact, it was kind of pretty trashy in the early game while holding up pretty well towards the late game. The very end game it fell off, but in the late game, like your late stage 4, stage 5, it was still a pretty decent comp, especially if you did your rerolls and hit. So seeing this change from 75 to 70, it kind of seems right to me. Meanwhile, Hellion 8, so you basically needed spats. And the thing with Hellion spats is Hellion spats can get out of control depending on what champions you put it on. Like, you start combining Revenant with Hellion, you start seeing really weird things in this game. And weird and triggering things, I might add. So, man. Nightbringer, there is no, like, real Nightbringer comp. There really hasn't been since Dragon Slayer left. So... while I'm happy to see it get buffed, I don't think this really does anything because 6 Nightbringer is really awkward. You're not getting a lot of advantages because you're not playing like Morgana or you're not playing Darius. There's just not a lot of value in just playing a bunch of Nightbringer champions. Most of the time, you're just going to play 4 for this 60% scaling. Meanwhile, they nerfed Nightbringer 8 damage, and I don't know why. The only thing I think of is something with Aphelios was going ham, so I don't know. Same thing with this. Like, I can understand this 250 to 200%. That makes sense to me, but I don't really understand why they needed to nerf 6. Ranger, yeah, Ranger 2 is kind of meh, and it probably should be a little better, especially like Vayne. Vayne carry is really weak, and it should be a lot better in the early game. Sentinels needed a nerf at 3. The 3 Sentinel 3 Skirm opener is just like bonkers. It's one of the most ridiculous openers I've ever seen in this game. So to see this get nerfed is welcome. Skirm 6, 1 AD boost, that's fine. Skirm's oddly enough, with very little changing, just like completely fell off the map at 6. It used to be a pretty decent comp to play, but right now, I think it has more to do with Dragon Slayer falling out, the loss of Trundle and the loss of Pantheon. Those 2, I think, were doing a lot of work for the comp. So it kind of just needed something else because Sentinel really was not replacing the Dragon Slayer that was lost there. It was in the early game, but not so much in the mid to late game. Tier 1 changes. I have no idea why Leona's getting buffed. I can't answer that. Like two-star Leona is so tanky already. I don't know why we needed this buff. Olaf is getting nerfed at 1-star, 2-star, and 3-star. Olaf's the best one cost champion in the game. He tanks and he does damage. He's great. Vayne AD buff. Vayne needed an AD buff. Not much else to say there. Tier 2 champions. This was a nerf to Sedge, right? Yeah. Sedge. Because they made Sedge a brawler, I think these numbers just were too high. And that's fair. They just added a trait down, and I believe they did nerf Sedge going into the change, but it just wasn't enough. Set buff. Set's one of the worst champions in the set, so he needed a buff. The idea here is that no one's really playing brawler frontlines. There's no reason to play like 4 brawlers. It's just not great. It doesn't synergize well with a lot of comps. Thresh. So when you include Forgotten scaling with Thresh, like this is actually a lot of damage. Thresh is supposed to function more like Blitzcrank did in set 3, but he like was doing enough damage to one-shot Lucian. That probably should not happen. That's not good. This is like a support CC unit that was just kind of killing carries. It's a little awkward. Various damage buff. Since Redeemed has been kind of nerfed a bunch of times, there hasn't been a good comp for Various. He's still a good unit. He's just not good enough to really play. But maybe this helps. I honestly don't know. It's a small buff. Lee Sin. What do I want to say about this? So Lee Sin has kind of always been a pretty good unit. He provides a lot of utility. He's a good frontliner. And does a surprising amount of damage, especially at 3-star. And I think that was probably why they made these changes, was to nerf the 3-star. It wasn't uncommon for him to die early before he cast. So I'm not surprised. Well, no. He often would cast, but it was like you needed to position him correctly for the cast to really be that useful. Like oftentimes, because he would cast so early, he would just like catch your frontliners, and then it would be difficult for him to build up an ult again. But in general, 3-star Lee Sin is pretty strong, especially when you like itemize him for damage. Mostly because this is a lot of damage. So I'm not surprised to see these changes. Really. Lulu. I don't think Lulu really needed a buff. I think it was just more that no one's teching Mystics in. There's just not a reason to. And I wouldn't be surprised if like this gets pulled because of, well, nah, it's probably fine. It's probably fine. Riven bonus damage. This one's interesting. So they nerfed Riven 3, and I understand this one. I'll get to this one in a reason. But they nerfed Riven 3. I haven't seen like a Riven 3 carry in about forever. There are good Riven 3 builds, but it's pretty rare to actually like do very well with a Riven 3. It's not that it's bad. It's just that it's kind of like eh. But I can do other things with this. But what's not uncommon is to see people just kind of hit Riven 3 while looking for something else. That's a little more common, and probably why they did this, because you could just kind of keep stacking Rivens, and not many people are even playing Riven, so you can hit Riven 3. Like, it's not that hard. At that point, it then just becomes a backup carry. in a comp that you probably weren't supposed to really have a Riven 3 in, realistically speaking. You were just kind of picking them up and you hit. So I think that's where this comes from. This comes from the fact that an early Riven is pretty busted. Like, one of the best champions in the game will carry you through all of Stage 2. Easy. Easy. One of the best champions you can find in an early crate. Between Riven and Nunu, it's just the best thing you can find in a Stage 1 crate. Yasuo, so we're finally getting the Yasuo nerfs that everyone has been asking for. He's had a little too much fun in the sun, to turn a phrase here. So they're nerfing the 3-star a little bit, and nerfing his base attack speed. I'm fine with this. I actually don't even think this is going to be that big a hit to him, but it will scale him down a little bit more than he probably should be at now. This is a good change, and probably the correct change. 4-star champions, Daisy's stun is being rescaled yet. Daisy, like, Ivern for the entire set has been like one of the best no item champions in the game. You just throw them in a comp. Same thing with Rel. Rel's pretty similar. You just throw them into your comp and you get value. Part of the reason why is because you get this stun and a unit a whole bunch of times. Meanwhile, Rel is just like the tankiest tanker that ever tanked. Cavalry, ironclad. It's just, you throw her in and it's just infinite. Her spell is ridiculous. It heals and protects thing. Oh. So this is not surprising to me. Tier 5 champion. So a bunch of changes here. Ashkahn. So I'm at two minds on this. So Ashkahn is not a bad champion, but he's not like really working out. I see people itemize him and they like aren't winning games off him. And I've kind of tried to figure out what exactly is going on with Ashkahn, why he's not working out as intended. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm not really sure why. I think what Riot has clearly identified is that his ult does not do enough damage when he's doing his swing, and that if his ult does more damage, he'll get more kills, which is probably true. But we'll have to see where this lands because he's not functioning as a carry like he should. Like a 2-star Ashkahn should blow up a board, and he's really not blowing up boards. Garen, haven't seen a lot of Garen recently. Part of it is probably because his 1-star variant is not that good, but his 2-star variant is okay. And I think there's a lot of worry with Garen. The way Garen synergizes with Karma is a very delicate balance. Karma and Garen just work like so well together, and Dawnbreaker comps kind of blow up when you get both of them online. So we'll see where this goes. I'm not too worried about it. I think this one in particular is probably just a preemptive hit. Gwen, part of the reason Gwen doesn't see play is really due to the lack of mystic needs. You just don't need to play mystics. But I do like the design here. I think just that she didn't attack enough to make these numbers really that useful. So moving it up to 2 and doubling it. Now, there's a possibility this comes out and is totally busted. That's a possibility. I don't think it will be, though. So we'll keep an eye on this. Heimerdinger. I'm surprised they didn't like really hit Heimerdinger harder than they did, but I do think they made probably the right choice in nerfing Heimer 1 damage. Heimer 1 stabilizes quite a bit if you itemize him, and he probably shouldn't. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see a hit the 2-star Heimer at some point. Like, see this go down to 550 or even 500. Probably not 500, probably 550. Volibear stun duration. So this one I think is a little awkward. Volibear 1 is already not a great unit. He does usually ult, but I don't think this was really that necessary. In general, he only gets one ult off. It's usually not that hard to um to counter it and to make him ult in a specific direction. So I don't really know if this was necessary. Plus, it's not uncommon to actually kill him and then kill him after a Revenant, and he never ults, or to kill him mid ult. That's the most depressing one. I think if they actually fixed that part where he dies mid ult, that would be a lot more helpful. Slight item changes: Death Cap buff, Redemption nerf, Sunfire Cape maxed health going down. That's an interesting one. Probably right though. It's a very good item in the early game. And the burn duration decreased. Yeah, Sunfire Cape kind of needed a nerf in the early game because there's so little damage being done in the early game right now that this Sunfire Cape can just kind of roll over people. The other two are fine. Notable bug fixes. I didn't even know this was a bug. I thought this was how he worked in the previous set. So I'm not sure why it would have been bugged. And Zephyr and Radiant Zephyr can no longer hit the same target. Yeah, if you were putting two Zephyrs on the same unit, that's pretty wild. Lucian ult no longer interrupted by taunts. Fine. Probably moved the end of combat. Now that sounds like it was probably a wild nerf. Or a wild bug. And they fixed the stun duration on that. So, I think the big thing this patch, and I know they're going through all the large changes here, the really big change here, I'm of the opinion, and is going to change most of this patch, even if something is completely bugged and they nerf it, what's probably most meaningful is this Karma buff. This Karma buff opens up AP comps, because right now AP comps are just not open. Unless you already know you're going to get to stage 5 and find Heimers, you don't slam AP items. There's just so few champions that AP items are really good on right now. But if Karma is open, that game is completely blown open. So I wouldn't be surprised we see Dawnbringer coming back. I don't think this is going to lead to like mass invoker. I don't think it's going to be like an invoker comp, because that generally has not been a very good thing to build. But we'll see. I do look forward to seeing more Karma based comps. The game kind of needs it, despite how much people kind of hate Karma's targeting priorities. And secondly, the calling now counting as an attack is a pretty big deal to Lucian. Not to mention this health nerf. It changes how you itemize him quite a bit. You're going to see a lot of hurricanes. Lots of hurricanes. So we'll see about that. Otherwise, I don't think a great deal is going to change. This Legionnaire change might make Draven a good bit better. I don't think we're going to see like a straight up Legionnaire comp, but Draven should be a good bit better, to the point we see way more Draven comps. And Draven was already okay, but he desperately needed a Bloodthirster. But this change kind of removes that need of a Bloodthirster, even if you just only keep 2 Legionnaires. Anyway, I think that's about it. I don't think there's too much else to talk about here. So, hope you all enjoy this patch. I do think we might get a B patch. I think there are a few things on this particular patch that could come out to be like completely busted. They have potential to be. They may not be, but they have potential to be pretty crazy. So we'll see where that goes. But anyway, that's it for these patch notes. I'll see y'all around. Peace.